There's no shame in being molested. It's not your fault. Open your mouth and talk about it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamise Grace. Welcome to Hearts.
And I'm Terrence Hardge. Thank you for joining us. Our guest today is an independent contractor born and raised in California and lives here now, but lived in Montana for 15 years. He has an adult daughter and 4-year-old granddaughter. Welcome, Jeff Moller.
Hi, thank you, Terrence, for inviting me. A pleasure to be on your show.
Appreciate it. We appreciate you coming to share your story today. My first novel, Innocent Guilt, is about a man who heals from trauma perpetuated by another man. Can we talk about your childhood trauma?
Yeah, we could actually. That's actually that trauma that we're going to talk about right now is what started this whole ball rolling. And I was probably about 8 years old. Me and my cousin used to stay over at my grandmother's house all the time. And right around the time where he and I started staying there, he started to molest me. And that carried on to about age 12 when my grandmother finally caught him.
Hmm. How
Uh,
old were you when that started, Jeff?
I was about roughly about 8 years old.
My goodness.
Yes, and when my grandmother caught him, she didn't say anything. Her comment, I recall, was "boys will be boys," and it was kind of brushed underneath the rug as like a dirty family secret.
Wow.
Man, how did you deal with that?
But it's really weird. When I was 8 years old, I really didn't have any idea that there was anything wrong with that. I was 8 years old. I had no idea, but something just didn't feel right about it. And honestly, through my teenage years, because of that, what happened, I always wondered, am I gay or am I straight? Because what happened to me as a man to a boy, and it just really confused me sexually, confused me emotionally, confused me mentally. How I dealt with it was I had all this stuff going through my head, and I found if I smoked a little bit of weed and drank a little alcohol, that those voices kind of quieted down, and I was able to deal with life.
Wow. I think it takes so much courage for you to share this. A lot of people suffer trauma, and a lot of people, like you said, sweep things under the rug. And there are a lot of people that deal with their trauma by turning to substances to numb it. How did this affect you throughout your life?
Well, as I stated, I started smoking a little weed, started drinking a little bit. This was in about 13 or 14 when I was still in junior high. And I went to school, Village Christian Schools. My behavior got kind of erratic. My behavior wasn't that of the norm. So in ninth grade, Village Christian School decided that I didn't need to go there anymore. And they removed me from the school, and started going to a public school. And LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District, for someone that was experimenting with alcohol and drugs, it was a prime location for me to be in.
Was the molestation something that family ever started to take seriously?
I would say when I lived in Montana, my parents came up to visit me, and that's when I told them what happened. And I guess
How old
it
were
was
you at that time, Jeff, if you don't mind
oh,
me
I
asking?
yeah, I was probably about 35,
So
maybe
you
around
carried
there.
that for a long time.
Yeah, I heard that for a long time. I got into a lot of drugs and alcohol with my girlfriend at the time. We got into a lot of the occult stuff, tarot card reading, astral projection, things like that.
I want to go back a little bit. I'm sorry
Mhm.
to cut you off, but I have a question. When your grandmother found out, did the molestation stop? And then the second part of that question is, how did it change the family dynamic with you knowing that your grandmother knew?
Okay, here's the whole weird part to this. Yes, my parents, they didn't find out about the molestation, but they caught him teaching my other brother how to masturbate in a really peculiar way. So my dad had a talk with my cousin about that situation, and then it stopped after that.
So was that after you turned 12 years old, Jeff?
Yes, yes, that was probably right around that age. That's about when it stopped. And it didn't really change the family dynamics that much because my parents, as growing up, didn't know the whole story. And
Mhm.
I kind of kept that to myself. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to admit that what a one man was doing to me. It's not something you want to talk about at that age when you're confused sexually anyway.
How did it
So
manifest over the years in terms of relationships? And did you at a certain point realize that you liked women, or how did that manifest with you, Jeff?
yeah, I was always attracted to women. I questioned it a little, not that much, because I always was attracted to women. And that, so I knew going into high school and stuff, that wasn't going to be the case, that I wasn't gay. But it did have a big effect in my relationships. I'm going on my third marriage right now. It created a lot of sexual problems for me. My first two marriages ended because of drug and alcohol addiction.
Jeff, may I ask what type of drugs you turned to?
Alcohol was always there. Alcohol was there through my whole entire 30 years of drinking and using. In the 80s, of course, anybody that knows the 80s, it was cocaine. And then it turned to smoking cocaine, free base or crack cocaine. And then after I discovered methamphetamines, I gave up the cocaine and went to methamphetamines for a while. At the time I was using the methamphetamines is when my first wife got pregnant with my daughter. And that's when we moved up to Montana to get away from everything that we were in down here. Because I was selling meth, I was selling cocaine, I was doing everything I could to support my habit and not work. We moved to Montana when she was pregnant to get away from the drug scene. And that's that. In Montana, I still drank and smoked weed. Yeah, I just stopped I'm sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, when you started dabbling in drugs, were you aware that it was to cover up or try to deal with the feelings you were having from the trauma?
Not a clue.
Not a clue.
No, a lot of this all came to fruition during my treatment, my counseling,
right,
and stuff like that. When I got down to the causes and conditions, it was very obvious why I was there. And there's more to my story coming up about my second marriage, of how that affected my second marriage even more than my first marriage. My wife at the time was into the drugs and the alcohol and the weed with me. My second wife, not so much.
And with the second wife is where some of the trauma started to come out. Is that right?
I kind of always knew about it in the back of my head. I just never really gave it much thought. My ex-wife found out about it because a lot of times in my drunken blackouts, what she told me is I would blame everything on that. You would drink too. Wow. You would be this way too if you were molested as a child. Now, I don't remember saying any of that stuff. She told me I did in a blackout. So that's when my true emotions were coming out. And I was really, I guess in my drunken blackout, I was really bothered by it.
Right.
Not being in a drunken blackout, I didn't give it much thought.
That definitely shows that you were carrying a whole lot.
Yeah, so subconsciously, yeah. About this time is when I was in a more of a self-destructive mode. I was just trying to go full bore all the way, and if I lived or died, I didn't care.
Considering the person who assaulted you was a family member, did you see him during that time, or what was the nature of your encounters, if any?
He would spend the night at my grandmother's house and would ask if I could spend the night to have a sleepover. And with nobody knowing, then yeah, of course you can go spend time with your cousin. I mean, we're only like maybe a 3 or 4 year age gap.
This is when you're an adult in your 30s?
Oh, no.
Oh, you're talking about, okay.
I was talking then. Me and my abusers, we're now friends. Everything is really cool now, actually. It happened at my grandmother's funeral. The grandmother that hit it, that I lived with, when she passed away about 10 years ago, let's say he came to her funeral.
Jeff, that's quite a reconciliation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you give us more? Because that's quite a healing to have a restoration with the person who sexually assaulted you. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, while I was in treatment, at this time, I've been sober for about eight months. And while I was in treatment, my counselor had me write a letter from me to me at eight years old, apologizing to my younger self for not being there to protect you, blah, blah, blah. But I worked through all those feelings while I was in treatment. So when I saw my cousin, we never really brought up what happened, but come to find out, he was a meth addict for years. He was molested by a friend of his uncle, my uncle, his father, and his brother molested his son. It was this whole sort of thing in that family. He was sober at the time for I want to say almost 8 or 9 years at my grandmother's funeral. He was an elder in his church. There was just a love and a peace and just the softness about him, where he and I just talked, and I forgave him. That day, I forgave him. And I just felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. All that stuff that was bottled up inside was gone. If I ever go to Vegas, I stop by his house and see him. We're friends on Facebook. It's really a beautiful thing that happened after what ugly took place.
Jeff, I respect that. And
Did
go
he
ahead.
ever make an amends to
That's
you,
my
or
question. Because I mean,
No,
what you said is very beautiful. And thank God for the grace to forgive and let the weight go. But that's something major to never talk about. You never
it
discussed
was
it.
it was never brought up. It was going really well with him at my grandmother's funeral. We were talking. Everything was just I didn't want to bring it up and destroy that moment. I know, and he knew that we knew both there was a an elephant in the room, if you will. Just neither one of us was willing to talk about the elephant in the room.
how did you find out about his abuse?
Just through the family, through my parents, because when it came out that his brother was molesting his son, then a bunch of other stuff came out.
Gotcha.
Do you feel a peace about never discussing this with him, even though
Yes,
you're friends?
yeah, I do. I really do.
Help us understand your healing. What brought you to the point of restoration and forgiveness? There are a lot of people out there who've been through trauma as well, and they're like, I can't forgive. How did you do it?
First, how I did it, the first thing was I had to be sober. Forgiveness never would have came if I was still drinking or using, because that was always my excuse to drink and use. Once I removed the excuse to drink, which was him molested me, now I had to look at me and why am I drinking? Why am I using? So
I'm sorry.
yeah, so I was gonna say, if in order for me to forgive, I had to sober up first, and I had to come to terms with the fact that yes, this did happen to me. No, there's nothing I could do to change the fact that it did happen to me. How long do I want to live in that trap?
Was it difficult to deal with those emotions once you sobered up?
In treatment, yeah, it was really hard. I broke down many a times. I cried until I had no water left in me.
I know we live in a world where people are numbing their pain, numbing their hurts, and numbing their traumas because it hurts too much to deal with what we've gone through. What advice would you give to that person who's numbing themselves with substances because they say, I just don't want to deal with the hurt?
The advice I would give is you don't really have a choice. You're going to have to either deal with it. You deal with it now, or you could deal with it in a psych center. You could deal with it in a hospital. You could deal with it in jail. Because if you're numbing using alcohol and drugs, nothing good is going to come from that. There's only 3 ways to quit drinking, and that's jails, institutions, or death, or help from God. And if you cannot accept help from God, jails, institutions, and death are what's going to happen. You're going to have to deal with it sometime.
It's not easy to discuss this. It's not easy to find someone who has the courage to talk about this type of thing. And people need to hear it because I believe many people have gone through molestation or dealing with drug things, and people have so much shame that they're hiding behind closed doors. So I'm really believing for God to answer our prayer to speak to people to get some help and not.
It's especially hard, I think, for a male to admit that another male molested him.
Yes,
absolutely.
Because now you feel like, okay, they're gonna look at me like I'm gay. Yeah. I'm not gay, but that happened. You know, it's a very hard thing for a male to come clean with. I decided to come clean with it when I sobered up because I knew it would help people. Yeah. And actually, when I shared my story for the first time in a meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I spoke and I talked about the molestation, I had 2 people come up to me afterwards and say, you know what, I've never wanted to talk about it, but thank you. Now that I see that you could talk about it, I could talk about it. So, that's awesome. So it does help. Once I voiced it out there to a room, it lost its power. Yeah.
The enemy hides in darkness and obscurity.
Once you bring the darkness into the light, it's done.
I have a question. So going back to the cousin who molested you, I know you said you were okay with not having that conversation, but what if it's part of his healing journey and he decides he wants to have that conversation? Would you be open to it then?
Yeah, I would. As part of the recovery process is make direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others.
I was thinking about that, because if making amends is part of his healing journey and part of his sobriety, it should come to you.
Correct. But that's up to him.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why.
Yeah.
But I just want to. I want to know.
Yes, but if he said he wanted to talk to me about it, I would be more than open and listen to him.
Okay.
I'm sure he dealt with it with his sponsor and dealt with it in his way at his church, you know. And it says in AA, you know, except when to do so would injure them. So maybe he's thinking he doesn't want to make amends to me because it might be
Gotcha.
bringing up that it might cause me some hurt.
Gotcha.
When was your turning point?
So I was about 43. I was working for a local company in manufacturing. Been there about 5 years. Somehow I kept the job 5 years while drinking, and I was eating Vicodin while at the job. This is where I started my whole pain pill thing. And one day I left work. I was hungover. I remember this is like my last day drinking. I still remember being in the bathroom at work, and I had an airplane bottle of vodka. And it was about 9:30 in the morning. I remember this like it was yesterday. I remember looking down at this vodka bottle and saying, has it really come to this? I cracked it open and I drank it in the bathroom at work. Probably about 10 o'clock, I told my boss, I have to go. I'm not feeling it. I have to go home. Driving home, I knew this was the day that I was going to end it all. I already had it all planned out how I was going to kill myself. I stopped on the way home. I got a pint bottle of vodka. I knew I had a bunch of morphine pills at home. And I had a hose that I was going to run into my car. So what happened was I went home that day. I took a handful of morphine. I swallowed it down with a whole pint of vodka, one swallow. And I got in my car. I put a hose in my car. I was going to drive up San Francisco Road. Why that road? I have no idea. I was going to drive up San Francisco Road, park somewhere, run the hose from my exhaust pipe into my car. I was starting to feel the effects of the morphine and the alcohol. So I was kind of in and out of consciousness. So I guess I must have texted my mom, I love you, goodbye. And I started driving. Probably about a mile into my drive, I realized that I forgot my weed in my pipe. And I needed my weed in my pipe. If I'm going to sit there and kill myself, I want to be smoking weed as I do myself in. As I turned around, my mom got a hold of my dad. My dad got a hold of his pastor and the sheriffs. So when I turned into my driveway, it's a long driveway. It's an alleyway with a bunch of garage doors on it. I saw my dad and I saw 3 sheriffs. And I'm like, uh-oh, I'm drunk. So I backed up and I was going to run from them. My dad called me and just said, son, pull over right now. And I pulled over and I walked up. 2 younger sheriffs were there. They were going to arrest me for DUI. I smelled like alcohol. And praise God that he put this sheriff there. He was an older sheriff, a sergeant, that said, no, this man needs help. I probably told him in my drunken stupor that I want to kill myself and I'm done. So this sheriff did not arrest me. I would wish to this day I could know his name so I could thank him, because he was an instrument of God that got me to where I'm at today. And he took me to the behavioral health unit at Henry Mayo and put me in as a 5150. If you don't know what that is, that's a danger to yourself or for others on a 72-hour hold. Went to the emergency room. They did a tox screen on me. And that's when the doctor said, Jeff, you have so much opiates in your system, you should not be alive right now. On top of, I don't know if anyone knows, you do not mix alcohol and opiates. They're both suppress your heartbeat and your breathing. The doctor said he does not know how I was alive. This was August 22nd, 2013. All this happened. Finally, I passed out in my cell, and I woke up that morning and looked around, and I was just like, I can't believe I'm here. And something told me to get on my knees, and I cried. I prayed that prayer that every alcoholic prays. Said, God, I can't anymore. That was August 22nd. I tried to kill myself August 21st, 2013. August 22nd, 2013 is my sobriety date, and I have not touched alcohol or hard drugs since then. When I finally prayed to God and said, I need you in my life, I need some help, I was delivered that day. I walked out of there with no withdrawals, no cravings. I still had to go to treatment because I was part of the cops not taking me to jail. That was my 4th time, and that was my 4th treatment. 3 other treatments I did up in Montana, 1 in prison, 1 in a halfway house. Obviously, none of them worked. But yeah, that suicide attempt woke me up. I guess you could say I got God smacked. God
Wow.
smacked me enough, and God got my attention, and He delivered me. I have not had a craving for alcohol, cocaine, meth, heroin, pills, anything like that since that day.
Praise God. That is awesome.
Praise, if I would have turned to God back when I was going through a lot of my stuff, if I would have turned to God instead of turning away from God, because I was angry at God, I was angry at the church, I was angry at my parents, and my parents went to church, so they got to be part of the problem too. Was If I would have turned to God and turned to my parents to help me, I think things would have been a lot different. If I would have talked to somebody about your problems, talk to someone about what's going on in your head and in your heart and in your gut and in your spirit. You keep that stuff bottled up, it's just going to fester, it's going to grow, it's going to rot, it will destroy you. And the enemy is going to see that as a cut on your skin, and he'll weasel his way in and lead you to believe that this is the only way to cope with it.
I believe that wholeheartedly. With you being honest about what happened to you and having sort of that gap between 12 years of age all the way to your 30s and not telling anybody about it, what would you say to that person who's carrying a dire secret, something that's eating them up, something that they're numbing? What kind of advice would you give them?
Find one person who you can trust, that is tight-lipped, and talk to that person. Get it out. When you get it out, it loses power. When you keep it in, it's like I said before, it festers and it rots. And in turn, it rots your heart, it rots your spirit, it rots your soul, to the point where I thought I had to kill myself. If I just would have opened my mouth and told somebody something, my life would have been totally different. Thank God that He causes all things to work together for good. Because of all that, I'm here today with a story that I hope helps a lot of people. And I believe that's why I was saved that day, because I have people to talk to. I have people to share my experience, strength, and hope with.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you sharing your story. God gave us this assignment, and this is more than just hearing people's interesting story. We know that there are lots of people out there who are keeping things hidden inside of them, who are keeping things that are eating away, that are festering. And I believe wholeheartedly that your story is going to bless many. So people will be encouraged to get the help they need, to open their mouths about what they went through. So I really, really respect your courage, and thank you for coming on.
You're very welcome. One last thing I will say, there's no shame in being molested. It's not your fault. It happened. And I'm sorry if that did happen to you, but it's not your fault. It was the person that did it to you. It's their fault. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Open your mouth and talk about it.
Thank you for that, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
You can reach the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 800-656-HOPE, and dialing 988 routes you to the Suicide Lifeline. Freedom and help are available to you. Get the help you need.
And I was on Cops, season 23, I think, episode 21. I'm actually on Cops. I have the episode.
Wow.
When you don't want to be a celebrity. This episode is brought to you by Fatal Perception, my novel, found on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Hi, everyone. I am Jamise Grace, and welcome to Heart to Hearts.
I'm Terrence Hardge. Thank you for joining us. Jeff, do you remember how drugs were introduced in your life, where you were when things were offered?
Yeah, I remember the first time I smoked weed, actually. It was from a neighbor down the street. We smoked weed one day on the way we were walking to school. And he said, "Hey, you want to try smoking a joint?" I said, "Sure." And it just snowballed from there. Back in the 80s, there was these things, California coolers. They were like the first wine cooler ever made, and they sold them in 2-liter jugs. So we used to get one of those, drink one of those, and smoke a joint before school every day.
I was looking recently, Jeff, at how loneliness is actually an epidemic, according to the Surgeon General here in America. And I'm just thinking about the trauma that you went through and the fact that you didn't share it with your parents until you were 35. Did you share it with any friends? Did you share it with
Yeah,
anybody you went to school with?
no. Only person that I told about it was at the time I was doing meth, my girlfriend Jolene. She knew about it, and all my wives knew about it. Maybe not my first wife, my second and my third wife for sure. I talked to them about it.
Those are some highly addictive drugs. How have you
Yes.
managed to get over them?
But that was just the beginning of my drug use. At the end, towards the end, before I had my great light experience, if you want to call it that, I was into Oxycontins and heroin. That's after it was a long, sordid story. We'll get there. But at the end, it was morphine, oxys, and heroin that did me in.
Wow. Tell us more about how your story unfolded.
I'll start after the molestation. We already covered that part. Before I graduated high school, I was still living at my parents', but I was smoking weed and drinking and being very, very rebellious around the house, I guess you could say. Finally, when I was 17, my parents finally kicked me out of the house. That's I pulled a knife on my mom. Her and I were having a fight. I went to the kitchen. I pulled a knife and threatened to cut her. So my dad's like, "You can't be here anymore." And so I moved in with my grandmother when I was 17. My grandmother, the great enabler that she is, would buy me alcohol, would give me money. I didn't really have to work. And her next door neighbor, I used to hang out with him. He worked for the Burbank studios at the time, and he's the one that introduced me to cocaine, and then in turn to the freebase.
The grandmother that you moved with at 17, that's the same grandmother that you were living with when she found
Yes.
out about the molestation. Okay.
Yes, yes.
I feel like a lot of times when we're looking at people and judging what happened, even with the incident with the knife when you were growing up, people will look at the behavior, but they don't know the trauma that happened, what you were dealing with. Did you feel like you weren't seen at that time? Did you feel like you were bottling things up when you had that encounter with your mom?
Um, that's a long time to think back. A long time ago to think back, especially with all the drugs in between. I don't know. I was just angry. I was just an angry teenager, and I don't think I really put much thought into it at the time. Why I was angry? I was just angry.
At 17, it sounds like you were pretty heavy into drugs. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was at 17. I was smoking weed and drinking at the time. I didn't start doing the hard drugs until probably about when I moved in with my grandmother, probably about 18 or 19.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I was still drinking, smoking weed. You know, my parents, I was smoking cigarettes. I started smoking cigarettes when I was probably about 14. From there, from after I started doing the cocaine, I met a buddy of mine that lived up in Sunland. And I moved up there with him. I lived in a camper in front of his house. And that's where I started doing meth. I did meth for about 2 years, selling meth, living out of his camper. Actually, quick funny side note, when I was living in that camper is when I met my first wife, Sandra. And when we were in the camper, a boyfriend of hers, her next boyfriend of hers, came and knocked on the door to serve her a restraining order. So I told her, "Hey, you need to go get rid of him." About 5, 10 minutes passed. I opened the camper door, and there he is on top of her, strangling her. Lips, face was blue. So I picked up a screwdriver and I stabbed him in the back. He went and called the LAPD. Now here's the kicker: LAPD came back with cops, with the TV show Cops, and I was on Cops, season 23, I think, episode 21. I'm actually on Cops. I have the episode.
Wow.
When you don't want to be a celebrity.
I actually made the front cover of the TV show.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so I was on Cops for stabbing him, and he actually is the one that went to jail because he was trying to serve her a restraining order. So he went to jail for violating his own restraining order, and I got off on self-defense.
Man.
Yeah, that was fun. And actually, when I was in prison is when that one aired, and everyone in prison saw it. So I was like my 10 minutes of fame.
Man. Jeff, why did you go to prison?
When I was in Montana, I went to college there, which I have my associate's degree now in electronics from the college up there. But when I was in college, I was only going to college. I wasn't working, so I was supplementing my student income by selling weed. I sold some weed to a downstairs neighbor, his wife. Well, dude got mad. and called the cops and said, hey, this guy upstairs from me is selling weed. So the drug task force set up a buy with me. I sold him an ounce of weed about 8 o'clock in the morning. So about 8:30, I look out my window, I see a bunch of cops were running up to my house. And I got snapped for felony sales of a dangerous drug, felony possession with the intent to sell, and possession of paraphernalia.
Wow. I actually have watched Power Book 2, and the whole plot of that show is about a college student selling drugs. And I really was wondering how realistic that plot was, but you kind of proved that.
Yeah,
You
so
were
when
there for
they
your
kicked in my
education, yet you were supplementing.
yeah, I had to supplement my student income, and that was the best way I knew how to. I could make a little bit of extra money, and I didn't have to buy my own weed. So when they kicked in my door, and they busted me, I bonded out of jail. But when I went to my hearing, at my sentencing hearing, I pled guilty. I was looking at 100 years behind bars.
What? For
This was
wait, what? What were your
for
charges?
felony sales of a dangerous drug, marijuana. This is back before it was legal. This is
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I was looking at it 100 years. So I took a plea bargain for eight and a half. I got 8.5 years. But what happened at my sentencing, the high school history class came in to watch a court case, a sentencing of a court case. So my lawyer leaned over and said, Jeff, you're screwed. The judge is going to use you as an example what happens when you sell drugs to this whole class of high schoolers behind you. So I got 8.5 years.
Was that your first charge, Jeff?
No. I had a couple felony assault charges, a lot of misdemeanor charges, unpaid traffic tickets, driving on suspended licenses, you name it. I've been to LA County Jail more than you could shake a fist at.
Mm.
I thought Montana would be as lenient as California, man. I had them all.
So again, I know your story is very colorful. You were also in Desert Storm. When
Yes,
does the military come in?
Right.
Okay, the military was in between the cocaine and the meth.
Oh, wow. That
What age range is that?
Yeah, I joined the military when I was 20, and I got kicked out of the military on an other than honorable discharge at 22.
Hmm.
But while I was in the military, I did serve over in Operation Desert Storm. I was on an ammunition supply ship, and actually my ship, the USS Santa Barbara, is in the history books as the first ship in a combat zone to have females on board.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, our crew was 40% female.
Wow.
So yeah, I was in the supply corps is where I learned logistics, which is what I still do now. But yeah, I got busted for being drunk on duty. I got busted for missing ship's movement. I showed up at the pier after being drunk all night, and I looked around and my ship was gone during Desert Storm. So not a good thing to have happen. So after all that, and then I finally peed a hot positive for cocaine while I was in the Navy. So they decided that I was unfit for military life and gave me an other than honorable discharge.
Was that easy to access in the Navy? As easy as it was not?
Oh, once your ship's pier side, I was stationed in South Carolina. You could live off. It's just like a job then. You go to the ship in the morning, leave the ship at night. It's just like a job then.
What's
So,
the
yeah,
difference
you could go out.
between unhonorable and dishonorable,
I
or
lost
less
all
than
my,
honorable?
I lost all my VA benefits. I lost my GI Bill. I lost everything.
Isn't that the same thing that happens when you get a dishonorable discharge?
Yeah, that's what dishonorable, other than honorable, what they call a big chicken dinner, which is a bad conduct discharge. But I got it kind of like in the middle.
Okay.
So, but still, either way, I lost all my benefits, and they gave me a bus ticket home from South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, was that close to your turning point? What was your turning point?
Oh,
Or
no.
people call it?
That was 22. I didn't sober up till I was 43.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, so I have a long road. I have a long, miserable road ahead of me.
I think we have a few marriages in there as
Yeah.
well.
Yes. After I got out of the military, I came home. That's when I started selling meth. I was running meth for this guy. I was running meth and cocaine for him. He bought me a truck so I could run it with a bunch of stash compartments in it. I was selling it myself up in Sunland. And that's where I met my first wife, where I got pregnant with, and then I moved to Montana. Yeah, up in Montana now is where I got busted for selling drugs, and I got 8.5 years. I ended up doing 3.5 years locked up, and then I got out on parole. Started off at a halfway house up there. It was called a pre-release. Lived in the pre-release for 1 year. Got a job, got an apartment, and then moved out of the pre-release.
Jeff, do you remember much about your prison experience?
Yeah, actually, I do. And it this is gonna sound funny, but up in Montana, doing prison time is not bad. If they told me I had to go back today, I would be like, okay.
You make
It
it
was
sound like a country club.
there was no gangs, there was no separation of blacks and whites and Mexicans. There was none of that. The Native Americans ran the tobacco and the drug trade, so you just let them do that, and it was just real peaceful. We all had TVs in our rooms. We had pool tables. We went to the weight room every day. We had softball leagues. It really wasn't that bad of a place to do time. If I had to do time, I'm glad it was Montana.
He makes it sound like a resort.
I've
Never heard prison prison described like that before.
Yeah, when I went to the pre-release, I had some behavioral issues, and they sent me back for 6 months. Now, when they sent me back, it gave me enough points on my sentence to put me on the high security side. Now, the high security side, we were locked down for 18 hours per day.
So how old were you during that time?
I was in prison for the turn of the millennium. I was there from, I want to say 99 to 2002.
Okay. So I'm not trying to get you to tell your age, but I'm trying to wrap my brain around. I know we were around 20 to 22 in the military. Is this about 8 years later, or?
Yeah, 2022 in military. Then I got into some meth for 2 years. First wife got pregnant, moved to Montana, went to college, just did the normal stuff up there until I finally got busted. I'm still smoking weed, drinking, going to college. I was working as a waiter up there for a while. Got busted, did 3.5 years in prison, got out.
I know we're working our way to your turning point, but I'm really curious. 3 years is still a long time to be in prison. Were you recognizing that you had unresolved issues? Were you considering or trying to turn your life around? What was going through your heart and your mind during that time?
No, during that time, really, I wasn't really thinking still that I had a problem. My problem was I got caught. The judge was wrong. The cops were mean. It was everybody else's fault. Just let me do what I want to do. I'm not hurting anybody. Just let me do what I want to do and we'll be fine, was my attitude at that time. I had very chronic alcoholic behaviors. Just blamed everybody for everything except for me.
Did your alcoholism ever affect your health?
Fortunately, no. I got a clean bill of health. I go for my physical every year. Praise God that my health, after 30 years of drinking, I drank the swill vodka too, the cheapest stuff I could find. Stuff smelled like rubbing alcohol. And somehow my liver, my kidney, my stomach, everything is fine.
Praise God for that.
Yeah.
You ended up getting married a second time.
Yeah, so when I got out of the pre-release, I got myself a little apartment. And I don't get jealous, but in Montana for a 1-bedroom apartment, I was paying $200 a month.
What year was this?
This was
What year was this?
This was in the early 2000s.
Okay. Oh, wow.
That's when I was working at the Gold Rush Casino as a waiter and bartender. And that's where I met my second wife. And her and I, we gambled, we drank together and stuff like that. But it was not really, once I met her, my drinking and stuff slowed down a little bit. I wasn't smoking weed with her because she didn't really like smoking weed, but we still drank. We drank and gambled profusely.
Was being a bartender not a good idea for you, considering the alcoholism?
No, actually, no. It was the perfect job. It's like being a drug dealer when you're a drug addict. But hindsight, it probably wasn't the best idea. But you really can't drink much as a bartender anyway. People buy you shots. You take a shot and take a drink of your beer and spit the shot out in the beer.
Oh, it's a whole strategy for it.
Yeah, you can't be too lit up, but you don't want to be at 2 o'clock in the morning, face down, bottom of the bar.
Jeff,
so that's where I met my second wife.
Okay. Can you tell us more about how faith played a role in your healing process?
Okay, so growing up, my dad became a Christian, a born again Christian, probably when I was very young. I don't remember. I was still in diapers. And my mom was not. Actually, my dad almost left my mother over it because my mom would constantly berate him, belittle him for being a Christian. But he still took me, it was just me at the time, took me to church. And finally, my mom, I don't know the whole story, but how my mom finally came around, and my mom eventually became a born again Christian as well. So I was brought up in the church. I was baptized full submersion at age 12, accepted Christ around the same time. But then cousin happened, which kind of threw everything, turned everything around on me.
Jeff's referring to the molestation that happened to him discussed in a previous episode.
It's probably around 16 when I told my parents I'm not going to church anymore. I'm done. I'm done with church. Hindsight now, looking back, I was pissed at God. How dare you let this happen? I was blaming him. I was blaming everybody but me. So after 30 years of drinking, doing drugs, hiding from my problems, my second wife left me because of drugs and alcohol. She got me into treatment, and she packed up her stuff and left.
Wow.
But I do owe her my life. If it wasn't for my second wife, I would not be where I'm at today. She got me into treatment. She got me set on a firm foundation before she did leave.
Do you think she loved you?
I know she loved me. I loved her too. The best way an alcoholic could love. But I know, and she's told me, I know she would have died for me. She was such a good woman, and I drank her away.
Jeff, why were you suicidal?
I was at a jumping off point. It's like I can't live with alcohol, and I can't live without alcohol. I can't live doing drugs, but I can't live not doing drugs. So what do you do? What do you do in that situation? I have to quit, but I can't quit. I can't live with him. I can't live without him. And my solution at that time was just kill yourself. It'll make my second wife happy. She'll be at peace without me. My parents. This is what was going through my head. My parents will be at peace. They don't have to worry about me anymore. All this stuff was going through my head. And I said, this is the best that I could come up with, was how I was at that time.
And the therapy that you went through, the counseling, did that come before or after the suicide attempt?
That was after the suicide attempt, while I was in treatment.
So had you ever tried to do treatment before the situation?
Yeah, three other.
That's
three
right,
other,
you said.
three other attempts at treatment, but I wasn't ready.
That's what I was going to ask. So was it something that you were forced to do, or were you saying, okay?
I was forced to do the first three. It was part of my sentencing requirements in Montana.
And why did you do the one that worked?
I just needed to be away from work. I needed to be away from society. I was there for 29 days. I already knew at the time, because I've been to treatment so many times, I already knew what I needed to do per the program. The only thing I really needed to stay sober was Jesus Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit. But I was going to treatment to appease the wife at the time, to appease the parents, because everyone, and treatment is a good start, but it's not the solution. It's a lifelong solution. Treatment's just a good start.
Particularly if you have three that you were kind of mandated or forced to do, but then you have one where, hey, I really want to come out of this. I want to change my life.
Right. Yeah, they were all really shocked too when I showed up to treatment, and I don't know if they even really believed me with the amount of drugs that I was doing, because I was not having any withdrawals.
That's a miracle.
It's a true miracle. I should not be sitting here talking to you today.
When Jeff hit rock bottom, he almost took his own life, but God miraculously intervened, and Jeff worked on his healing.
I instantly went to AA. I was in Alcoholics Anonymous for 8 years, until a friend in AA said, "Hey, Jeff, you should come check out this church we just found, Higher Vision." So that was about 3 years ago. And I started going to Higher Vision and realized that my spirituality in AA is becoming stagnant, and I need to move. I need to move on from AA, because I have been delivered. I am recovered. You don't recover from cancer and still going for cancer treatments, right? So that's how I kind of looked at it. And I started going to church full time, got away from AA and doing church. I rededicated my life when I came back to Higher Vision. I got baptized again by one of the pastors, Pastor Dwayne there. He baptized me, and I haven't looked back.
Jeff, You shared a lot. What would you like for people to know about you?
I'm a true believer in Christ. You know,
I see your Waymaker shirt over there.
I love the song too. It's my favorite song. I'm a true believer in Christ. That life is hard. Life is hard. Life throws us curveballs. The enemy is out to kill, steal, and destroy everything good that we have in life. You know, I was brought up in a wonderful family. My cousin decided through his actions that wasn't going to be the case growing up. I was still in a wonderful family, but I didn't think so. My behaviors, it was hell growing up. I had a really bad stuttering problem, which I still do have a little bit of a stammer, if you haven't noticed. But growing up before speech therapy, I was teased relentlessly through junior high and high school, which led to a lot of self-esteem issues, which just perpetuated the drugs and the alcohol.
Sometimes trauma can cause those things. Do you think that trauma played a part in that?
You know, I never thought about that. I don't know. I just wish it would go away, but
You sound great.
it makes me who I am. Life throws you curveballs, and the enemy is out there to kill, steal, and destroy everything that you have. You don't have to let it.
Our friends, go spread joy with a contagious smile, and a hug doesn't hurt. You never know what life you might be changing or whose heart you might be healing. We'll catch you next time. Thank you for that, Jeff.
Thank you very much.